from 1 billion to 10 billion. So that's the banking business that we're dealing in and how to balance on those two fronts.
The government has done it progressively. It is not immediate. So it will take 5 years for us to reach the 10 billion. But what I'm asking, is there any disclosure to demonstrate that the reactions to this effect are there? Or how long does it take? Do we have any disclosure to tell us when the CBR was reduced, it took this time for this institution to react to the changes?
Yeah, that's, I'll say this in answering that question. You know, last year, from the beginning of the year, the interest rates were actually going up. Not all banks adjusted their rates upwards because, again, banks are competing. So it's not just an issue of increasing the rates, because you can increase the rates and then now be able to mark yourself out of the market. So there are some banks, deliberately, they maintained their interest rates to compete in the market as the interest rates were going up. Now, those banks are in a dilemma even currently. Now when they are coming down, we are being asked to come down. And yet when you're going up, we never went up. We actually took a hit just to be able to remain competitive and then also take consideration of our customer. Because they were feeling that, yes, we increase, the customer fails to pay, it goes to non-performing loans. So that's the dilemma that there is in the market. That's why you'll see it's not uniform. For February MPC, there are banks who have moved 0.3%. There are banks who have moved 3%. So if you look for a bank that has moved 3%, you may find when it was going up, they moved up by a slightly higher margin. So they're able to make a slightly higher margin coming down. But for a bank which remained, it was at 16, it's coming down, then we're asking the bank to still come down. You may find that that's why there's this variance, in that you'll find some banks have moved 0.5, others have moved 1, others 2, others 3%.
I may not have the advantage of the whole conversation, but I was following the discussions. But in the last 1 or 2 years, we've never had the CBR rate go beyond 14%. So even the argument that then these banks they never adjusted the interest rates downwards and they actually took a hit, I don't think that is really factual. It's actually misleading, because in any case, we've never had interest rates the CBR rate go above 14%. And if you follow the law, and then that should be at least at most 4 percentage points, then the highest should have been at 18 at any particular time, which is what is there with most banks now. So do you really want to say that as a statement of fact?
Yeah, typically, maybe I can use an example for purposes of demonstrating this in terms of assuming the CBR has moved consistently. I think it moved all the way to 13% last year. As the highest that we 13.
So 13 plus 4 percentage points, then the interest rates should not have gone anywhere above 17. The average now, as per the report of Central Bank, is 16.4. So it means that the average is way higher than even when the interest rate was the highest at 13%.
Yes, because there is a risk margin that is loaded onto it, and maybe so that I answer the question around whether capping is an option.
Before you go there, Chair, with your permission.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The question before you go to capping, because we are looking at solutions around this one issue. Right? You've been told that the Monetary Policy Committee set the current rates over 30 days ago. And the law you referred to speaks to the banking industry being able to act within 30 days. We need an explanation for that, and the penalty you'd rather we preferred for the non-compliant banks.
Yeah. So
maybe meant to help you. The last MPC meeting was on 8th of February. Okay? So 30 days from 8th of February would be on and about 8th of March. Today we are on the 25th of March. So between 8th of March and 25th of March, how many days later? 17 days later.
Yes.
So then you are clearly in breach of the law, and you're justifying how you're in the breach of the law.
let me explain, Chair.
Hold on.
I would also want
You have a chance.
I would also want to understand how the risk margin is determined. Because besides that, there's a risk margin. Is it on personal or on individuals, or the rate is common across the board?
Yeah, but now, again, I was following the conversation, and the answer was that different banks have different ways of determining the risk factor. And anyway, but I'm not attempting to answer your question. Responding to one of
That's why Chair had asked earlier that could we be in a situation where we are supposed to legislate over this risk issue, because it might be misused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So respond to the question about the risk factor and why it has to be different with different banks, and whether you think that then the best way to have a uniform, and we're asking you as a representatives of the banks, because we're not here to, we are here to try to understand your business, and so that we both protect the business and most importantly protect the consumers of the business. That's why we are here as the representatives of the people. So answer in that perspective, and because we're about 1 month after the MPC. And maybe just a follow-up on that MPC. We have the next MPC meeting in 8th of April. So if you've not acted on what the last MPC resolved, and you have another MPC coming up in 2 weeks, then, actually in a week, then are you really being responsive to the decisions made and to the directive given by your regulator, which which is your license, the Central Bank of Kenya?
And maybe, Chair,
Yes, CPA.
as they are responding particularly to that, can they confirm that CPK has intervened on this matter, has engaged them over this issue? Could they confirm? Because from the way we are talking, it looks like the regulator is talking his own things, and the bankers are spewing on their own. Could they confirm?
Please respond.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the easier one. Yes, CBK has engaged the banking industry on the same and continues to do so.
And up to now, we are that the MPC is about to take place without implementing the recommendation resolution of the first MPC. So what is happening?
Yeah. So on the question of MPC having met on the 8th of February, and 1 month now lapsed on the 8th of March. So banks did adjustments on their lending rates and communicated to customers as required by the law and the practice. So the numbers for March are yet to be published. That would now show the adjustments that have been effected. Because the numbers for March are yet to be published, what we did as an association was to call our members and ask them, to what extent have you made adjustments aligned to the monetary policy reduction in the central bank rate? And they gave us a range that, because all of them are applying different models, we have from 0.37% to 3% has been affected. And when we look at the average, it was coming to about 1.65%. So that is what has been applied, and it would be reflected within the lending rates for February, as well as also the lending rates for March, because that announcement was in early February. It would be affected within February and March. So those numbers, when they actually come out, it should reflect the rates that were affected. So with another adjustment coming in April, again, we see that being implemented in the days after April for purposes of just making sure that there is transmission. So for sure, when the numbers get published for March, we will actually see a reduction in the lending rate. And I think so far the number, though yet is to be published for lending rates, they've actually come down. We had in January 16.64. They've actually also come down to about 16.41 in February, and is expected even to be transmitted stronger in March, because that's when now the 1 month lapse of the notice period would actually have taken root. So we, by all means, we will see lower rates in March when the numbers actually get published. The other element that I think is important for us to explain is there is usually, typically in any economy, it's never uniform when rates are going up and when they are coming down. That is in any economy. And this is even demonstrated from the numbers that we have for deposit rates and lending rates. The adjustments usually are never the same. Look at it this way. When rates are going up, those that have fixed deposits in banks start to factor in very early, and they actually approach banks and say, you're giving me, I was giving you my deposits at 8%, but CBK rate has moved up, so there's anticipation that rates would go up. They're even willing to break a fixed deposit to contract it at a higher rate when rates are going up, because there is an incentive for it to do this. And they can even argue and say, all rates are going up, government security rates are going up, so policy rate has gone up. Now, there is pressure on the side of bank to reprice the deposits, because the depositors want a higher return because they can factor in the changes in the market. When the things turn, the depositors would even want to delay their loans that they had fixed for a longer period of time, for longer, because now rates are going down. No one wants to cut or break a fixed deposit, and that in itself, for as long as deposit rates remain high, there would be rigidity on the part of lending rates to also move down, and that's why you see them moving down slowly. When you look at the numbers that we have given on table 1, page 2, we have deposit rate changes, lending rate changes. Just take the example of November to January. Deposit rates, when rates were moving down, deposit rates moved from 10.41 to 10.05, a change of 0.36. Lending rates moved down from 17.22 to 16.64, a movement of 0.58. So banks have actually effected even a higher adjustment on the lending rate compared to the cost that they have to bear for deposits. So in essence, banks are doing the transmission of monetary policy. There is pressure, however, on the side of the cost of deposits that are not adjusting as fast. And I think Raymond, our CEO, did mention the pressure, competition for the same fund, because depositors are saying, government securities is giving us this. How much more would you give us for us to retain the fund within the bank? And typically, definitely, for a bank to be able to continue lending, they have to continue mobilizing the deposits. There's a cost to that. So we look at all those rigidities, that pressure that is not uniform when rates are going up compared to when they are coming down. There is the notices and accommodations that we have to give to customers. The 30-day notice period was really a consumer protection issue, particularly when rates are going up. It looks good, and I can bet with you, 30 days looks short when rates are going up, but looks very long when rates are going down. That's the asymmetry that we typically see. On the considerations where we are in terms of pricing, we had interest rate capping implemented between 2016 and 2019 when they were repealed. During that window, credit growth never went beyond 10%. And it's because if it is capped, it means then we are now moving fully into risk-based credit pricing. Now, in that risk-based credit pricing environment, each customer would be able to access credit at a risk profile that each bank does on them. So as a result then, we actually started seeing credit growth. It went all the way to 12%, 13%, and we started seeing stronger growth in credit that was able actually to support economic activity during that period. And I think numbers are there to demonstrate that. During the period when interest rate caps were in place also, because now the funding of private sector was limited to those that had good credit profiles, there was a lot of investments in government securities by banks as a result, because then the room in the private sector's lending is actually limited. So as a result, that private sector credit actually was very slow in terms of growth. So the risk-based pricing models, and I think the question that came through was, why don't we have a harmony? Is because the central bank then required that each bank prepares its own model, approaches the central bank, they have a discussion until they get the green light to implement it. All banks got the green light, but at an individual level. So they had their own pricing model, they had their own base determination, and the components that they add on the in that formula for purposes of pricing. So that was differentiated. But even the industry now has also appreciated that we need uniformity, so that even it's possible to gauge the transmission of monetary policy in a way that we can describe. Because if each bank is following its own model, then the response to a policy rate even becomes also non-uniform and non-coordinated to a great extent. You also asked, Mheshimiwa, the question around taxes on these huge, so to say, huge profits that are coming in. And it's fair also to demonstrate that the banking sector was one, as an industry jointly, one of the leading tax contributor in the economy. 190 billion shillings was contributed to government in form of taxes. And all this level of compliance cannot be disputed with regard to that. So income tax compliance is very strong. So another consideration on increasing taxes on the banking sector, it only means the expectations in terms of pricing again may actually be triggered in terms of pressure, because there is a shareholder expectation here at the end of the day. And if there is higher taxes, it means it has to be fed into expenses that the business has to incur, which again would be passed through to consumers. And I think as we discuss elements around the features of pricing in an environment where we're looking at reducing the cost of credit, it becomes a challenge. There was the other question around...
a point of order, Chair.
What was the point of order, Kalama?
Yeah, the profit you get, the question I was asking is whether it can be treated as income and be separately taxed away from the excise and those other taxes. That is the thought I was looking at. Not to get you help us determine the extent,
Okay.
but whether it can be rightly treated as an income to the bank that is making that profit, and therefore being considered for some form of taxation.
Yes, Mheshimiwa, what we'll be just doing for this economy will be very detrimental, because for government to run, businesses ought to be in the profit making, so that we pay taxes and we can be able to run government. Now, investors have options. So if
maybe a different way from what Honorable Kaluma was asking. We don't dispute the contribution to tax by the banking sector. But that contribution to tax is based on the profits that you generate, especially from your corporate taxes. How do you generate that corporate tax? Is by the profits you make by the spread between your costs of money, which is mostly deposits and shareholders' investment, and the interest rates that you charge. So we're asking, and would indeed make more sense, and would indeed have better economic transformation, even if your contribution tax was less, but your availability of lending to, especially the private sector, and MSMEs was higher. In that way, you don't have to be the greatest contributor to tax. Then there would be more people coming into the tax bracket because you have been able to offer them cheaper loans that they can repay and therefore spur their businesses and spur economic growth. Rather than saying, we are the big boys, we pay a great amount of tax to government to run this administration, to run the government, and therefore that's why we are making out of profit. But at what costs? It is like if I would sell food, okay, and now the profits I make from selling my food is contributing very much to taxes, but again the government has now to take the money that we contribute to taxes to go and give those people relief food because you have increased the cost of food. I'm thinking about that particular, where do we achieve this particular balance in this case? Your contribution to tax, perfect. But maybe we need to think about how do you make at least normal profits compared to other sectors and support MSMEs and private sector, and that way we all contribute to baking the cake, rather than only you shouldering the burden of baking the cake.
Yeah, thank you, Mheshimiwa. It's actually a deeper question, and it requires a very, very concerted effort, and it's all about government because of two things. The rates can't come down drastically if the non-performing loans are high. Major contribution is government, non-performing pending bills. So banks being in the business, you can't just expect the interest rates to come down, and yet on the other end, the non-performing loans are going up. Primarily because government is not paying businesses that are being supported by banks. That's one question. Number two, as long as government also is coming to borrow, and that borrowing is at higher rates, again, that conversation, it's extremely difficult to be able to address. However, Parliament has a chance to be able to have a role to play in these dynamics on government budget, because once we address the physical side and we can be able to manage our liabilities, those two aspects of pending bills, government borrowings, then you'll really find that, because there was a time within this country where the rates were really down and government wasn't borrowing as much, and then now banks will be able to look for private sector businesses to support, and those businesses will repay the loans. Unfortunately, at the moment, even if banks want to support small businesses, they go into raising the non-performing aspects. So those two aspects, pending bills, government borrowing, government budget, it brings this challenge within our economy. And banks can't be able to resolve that if we are not working together in partnership to be able to see how we balance that. Yeah.
Or maybe a really extreme thinking, cause National Treasury to have two different rates for their treasury bills and treasury bonds. One for institutions and one for individuals. Because really, the sad thing about this borrowing is that most of the money that we are lending to governments is actually government money. Because your largest accounts are actually with government institutions. Whether it is county governments, whether it is state departments, those are the largest accounts. And that is the money that is now going back to government as loan through treasury bills and treasury bonds that is crowding out all these private sectors. So that's not just a comment. It doesn't necessarily require your answer. But there are tips. I don't know whether you are responding to other questions that were asked, because there's something that you that came when you were doing, you are answering. On publishing of the match records, I'm wondering, what do you need to publish this? Why does it have to take? What do you really need to publish? Why is that data not available really? And I was checking your report that your average deposit rate is at 10.41% and 10.05%. I am sure when this information gets to Kenyans, they will be surprised that deposits actually earn 10% interest rates, or maybe specifically to fixed deposit accounts or savings account. Because I think the trick also where it's not necessarily a bad thing. You're not breaking any law, but it's how you have configured your business by having current accounts and saving accounts. Where now at any particular time, if my account has 10,000, Walabokaluma has 10,000, Naboyula has 10, that's 50,000. So really that is 10,000 money that you have at any particular time that is interest free, that you are lending to someone at 18%. So maybe, what this 10% are you talking about? Is it when you actually come to negotiate for fixed deposit interest rates, or is it interest rates for money held by Kenyans in their bank accounts?
Yeah, it's a good question, Chair. If you look at the deposit structure by volume, 60% is in time and savings deposits. This is now the money you would put in for longer. The other 40% is in the demand deposits, the transactional funds that sits in the accounts for purposes of meeting our transactions. Now, banks, out of all the deposits, it's only about 70% that is converted to loans. And it would typically, a majority of that is in the time and savings deposits because of the maturity profile. Because demand deposits, anybody could go in for money anytime. So the effective cost of funds that banks face is really on the fixed and time, the time and savings deposits, which is actually being remunerated at 10.05% on average. So it's only about 10% of the demand deposits that actually feed into to support loans. But you get that. 60% of the entire deposit book is in savings and time deposits, which are the fixed deposits are there, and the savings for longer. So that is what is the rate that we're talking about here, is actually on those ones, because effectively those are the ones that banks rely on for purposes of lending, because the deposits to loans ratio in the banking sector is about 70%. So the rest of the demand deposits do not support lending, but it's just supporting liquidity for the banking sector. So there's a premium for one to keep deposits for longer, and that's the premium that the banks have to pay for.
Do you think that even for the fact that even though the amount held in what I would call current accounts, I'm trying to use Kiingereza kawaida, or what I understand, not as the practitioners speak, the money put by Kenyans in their current accounts, even though they don't support you in your loan portfolio, as you say, because of those ratios, but you agree with us that they support the bank in their liquidity problem, in terms of making sure that the bank is liquid, then don't you think then that, especially because of inflation also, that there should be an interest rate that should ideally be paid even on those deposits that support you